Morning and welcome to our webinar series. This topic is entitled Developing Great Problem Solvers with 10 Simple Questions. My name is Damon Baker and I will be your presenter for the next hour or so. Okay, so some housekeeping items. The participants will be placed in listen-only mode. You will have an opportunity to ask questions throughout the presentation. There is a chat window in your control panel that you can type your questions, and those questions will be read by me aloud, and I will try to get to as many of those questions as possible by the end of the webinar, so we'll hold the questions until the end. There are some handouts available. Also in your window, your control panel, there is a icon that says handouts. There should be 5 of 5 in that box. You can download those during the presentation, and those are some useful aids and supporting materials that go along with the presentation topic that we will be covering today. A recording will be made of this webinar and will actually be emailed to you as whether you were able to attend live or not. This email would come to you as an attachment as a recording. So if you do not receive that within a day, you may want to check your spam folder to ensure that you received the email. And that same link can be forwarded on to others in your organization, and you can watch this presentation at your own leisure. All right, so a little bit about myself. My name is Damon Baker, and I am the CEO of Lean Focus, and it is a business I started about 6 years ago, prior to which I had a career in Danaher Corporation, where I worked for about 10 years, held 3 different roles within Danaher Corporation. I was responsible for the Danaher Business System Office for North America for Danaher Corporate, integrated many of Danaher's acquisitions, and also built Danaher Business System tools and deployed those tools across the operating companies inside of Danaher. One of the tools that I worked rather significantly on for a few years was the Danaher problem-solving process. So I'm quite familiar with the structure and rolling out problem-solving cultures within organizations. I was also a P&L leader within Danaher's organization. I led a business called Oroscoptic, which is in the dental platform. And then my first role in Danaher, I led the platform for product identification, the DBS function within that platform, about a $2.5 billion platform of businesses that make coding and marking equipment in the industrial space. Prior to my experience in Danaher, I had a career in consulting, doing mainly turnaround consulting work for private equity engaged clients who were acquiring businesses and then using lean tools and continuous improvement tools to drive value creation inside the companies they were acquiring. And then before the consulting opportunity, I was in operations, manufacturing roles. I was a plant manager, focus factory manager, continuous improvement leader. So altogether about 25 years in lean continuous improvement experience. I'm also a private equity partner, have been for about 5 years now in a lower middle market PE firm based in Dallas. And we actually make acquisitions, and we are on our 4th acquisition at the moment, whereby which we use the Lean Focus team to drive the value creation inside of the businesses that we acquire. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm currently residing in San Diego, and that's my career and a little bit about myself. So our agenda for today, we'll have a short, brief introduction about Lean Focus, who we are and what we do for those that are unfamiliar with our organization. Then we're going to dive right into these 10 simple questions that you can use to develop your problem solvers within your organization. We'll shift gears and we'll talk about the lessons learned and some strategies and a process that we use to help our clients build a high-performing problem-solving culture. So we'll have some case studies to share at that point in the agenda. And then we'll have a section on next steps, which is a self-assessment and resources. And this self-assessment is actually one of the handouts available to you that you can take with your teams to assess where you are in terms of maturity as it relates to a problem-solving culture in your organization. And lastly, we'll open it up for questions and answers. And as I mentioned before, you'll want to type those questions in the questions panel, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. So let's take it away. So Lean Focus, as I mentioned, is a company I started about 6 years ago. So we are a management consultancy and talent placement firm, and we partner with our clients to create high performance cultures that deliver sustained profitable growth. And through the application of our business system, which I'll talk about here in a moment, the Lean Focus business system, we're able to affect change, improve processes, and train people and change the talent inside of organizations. In addition to that process improvement work, we actually place talent inside of our clients to accelerate the adoption of this thinking and some of these principles and tools inside of an organization. So we think of it as the one-stop shopping for a CEO and his or her teams when they need to partner with a high performance improvement culture type of firm that comes in and uses a business system approach to drive value creation and sustainable improvement over the long term. Some of the clients that we've worked with span the breadth of many different industries and verticals in both geographies as well. And it's a pretty diverse group of businesses ranging in size all the way up to 80 billion down to startups of less than 10 million in revenue and everything in between. And what's interesting about the list that you see in front of you is the vast majority of them don't even manufacture products in the traditional sense. So there's a lot of services companies, transactional business companies, software businesses, technology companies, logistics companies, just more of an advertisement that lean and lean thinking and the application of a business system to drive a culture and to deliver results in a company is not unique to businesses that manufacture physical products. I mentioned earlier the Lean Focus business system approach. So it is a collection of tools and processes that formulate an overall system that we use to drive value creation inside of our clients. And if you look at the toolbox isn't just specifically targeted towards the traditional manufacturing or four walls of a plant. There's a set of tools around how we go about driving organic and inorganic growth. We call those tools inside of that subsystem the growth system. And if you were to think about the functions that those tools impact, it'd be functions like sales and marketing, R&D, product management. Then you move over to the lean system, and this is more of your traditional tools around improving safety, quality, and delivery and cost inside of a manufacturing organization or an operations footprint. And then we have a set of tools around business operating system, culture, and talent, and how do you manage the talent effectively inside your organization to be supportive of the overall culture that you're trying to install within the business. And then underpinning these three systems of growth, lean, and leadership is what we call the foundational system. And it's a set of 9 tools that are function agnostic, meaning regardless where you sit in the organization, these tools apply equally to you to drive results inside of your function. And you'll notice in the center of that box of 9 tools is the problem-solving system, of which we're going to talk a little bit about during this presentation. And the reason we have it in the center is we here at Lean Focus think it is one of the most important tools. In fact, it touches many of the other tools inside of the overall system of 50 or so tools that drive results in a business. So it creates the framework, the common language and approach by which we close gaps across our business, whether it's manufacturing, sales, marketing, doesn't matter, the process is applied very similarly. Lastly, beneath the foundation tools are guiding principles. So you can think of these as true north guideposts that help shape decisions and ultimately actions and behaviors that are taken inside of a company that shape the continuous improvement agenda in a business, and our mindsets and behaviors that need to be effectively adopted by all levels of the organization, not only leadership at the top, middle management, and frontline associates as well. So when you pull all of those together, you have a pretty powerful set of tools to drive sustainable improvement year after year after year versus having to think about how you're going to drive improvement in your business in an episodic or sporadic, inconsistent, and non-sustainable manner. So now we're going to get into the questions that are the basis of the webinar. And the first challenge I had was taking the hundreds of questions that you could ask of a problem solver and a problem solving team and distilling it down to 10. So this is my attempt, and I hope you enjoy. Hopefully it invites some discussion. So before we get into the questions, I want to differentiate between coaching and mentoring, because oftentimes we hear those terms used together, but they're actually two different things. So when you think about a mentor or somebody in your life that you would consider a mentor, the characteristics of that relationship would probably be something that you would consider long-term. They would probably be somebody that's very concerned deeply about your personal growth and the development of yourself. They're imparting wisdom, teaching, support, tough love, good love throughout all their interactions with you, but they don't really have a specific course of action, or for that matter, an objective to improve your behavior and how you work. So think of like wise counsel, and you can probably think of people in your life that fit that definition of a mentor. Whereas a coach, and also what we refer to problem-solving coaches when we partner with clients, the relationship between a coach and a person who's receiving coaching usually has a defined period of time. So in the case of working with some of our clients and we put them on this process to becoming certified trainers in problem solving, that finite duration could be about a period of 12 months as an example. And I'll talk more about what that process looks like. And during that period of time, we are focusing on very specific behaviors to improve or strengthen those and or eliminate ones that are taking away from your effectiveness in the here and in the now. And we're using live situations in order to do that. So none of it's theoretical. Very similar to how you can imagine athletes on a field receiving real-time, in the moment, in the game, coaching from the sidelines to change what's happening on the field. The very similar approach happens in business. One or the other isn't more valuable or better than the other. They're just different and they serve different purposes. So I want to set that foundation before we get started. So the first question is aligned to the starting point of problem solving, and the methodology that we employ inside of Lean Focus is PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. And in the beginning phases of problem solving, you're figuring out what's the background of the situation of the problem. So you can start with the question as a coach of the person receiving your coaching: how is this problem relevant to the organization as a whole? And what you're really trying to understand from the standpoint of the person receiving the coaching is, do they understand what we refer to as the burning platform? Do they understand the business case? What's the impact financially? Can they articulate that? Or have they narrowed it down just to the basics of this is the standard, this is the actual? Do they understand the higher level order impact of the organization? How do you check if the answer to that question or the behavior that you're observing when asking a question like that to a problem solver is off track or on track? We'll call that the process check. So if they're off track, what you might hear is a qualitative or opinionated justification for why the problem matters. So if you ask that question, they may be taken off guard, maybe be defensive and say, well, because it's really important, or because we need to do this, or because customers care a lot about it. And they would probably fail to mention the various stakeholders inside the organization that might have pain points associated with that, which indicates also a lack of buy-in. Whereas if they're on track, the impact is understood, it's clear, it's readily articulated, and they've worked across a different set of stakeholder groups to get buy-in and consensus around why this problem matters to the whole organization. So in effect, it's like selling the problem to the company and getting everybody engaged that we're going to work on it as a next step. Question number 2 deals with building a team. And the question you can ask here is, how will you attract a motivated team to want to work on your problem, and what's in it for them? So the purpose of this is to figure out who's going to participate on the team, who's going to read and or approve or offer coaching during the A3 process, and why do those people matter, and making sure that you understand their attitude towards the situation as well. Are they bought in? Are they detractors? Are they supporters? Are they neutral in this process? All of those things will help to gauge that level of commitment around the team. And again, we have a process check here. So if the response to that question is, I already know the answer, I don't need a team and I'm going to go it alone, big red flag. It's obvious that they're not engaging the stakeholders, involving the people who do the work in the solving of the problem. Whereas if they were on track, they're going to say things like, we've met it as a team, we've discussed, all the stakeholders are aligned, we're really clear how this problem affects everybody, and they're able to articulate that with facts and data and evidence. Moving along throughout the PDCA process, it moves on to question number 3, and it has to do with demonstrating the benefits of solving the problem. So the question is, what benefits are you hoping to obtain, and what are you trying to accomplish? And what we're seeking to understand with that question as the coach is to help that problem solver figure out and articulate the benefit that they're seeking in terms of the value that it has to the business. Is this something that's going to make the business simpler? Is it something that's going to make the process more convenient? Will this impact an improvement in quality, in speed, in cost, growth, morale? Whatever the impact is, can they really vocalize that in a way that's meaningful to the business? Now, if you ask that question and the answer is along the lines of things will get much better when we're finished, it's obvious they haven't sat down and thought through the symptomatic impact that this sort of problem has on the organization. Whereas the on-track behavior would be the impact of the organization will be a reduction of XYZ by this date, or X to Y by this date. Then we move further into the plan process. We're talking about grasping the situation. So it's about really understanding, do they understand the current state? So in the lean community, we may use terms like go to Gemba, map the process, understand the flow, the value stream, gather voice of customer. These sort of things are synonymous with what we're trying to achieve in this step of the process with coaching. So the question is, what do you actually know about the current situation, and how do you know it? And what we're trying to prevent is the number one mistake that people make in problem solving, which is jumping to a conclusion or jumping to a solution. Are they dealing in facts? Can they clearly demonstrate with visuals and with facts and data what the current situation may be, whether it be a value stream map, whether it be a set of Pareto charts that are able to visualize the gap that needs to be closed related to the standard. All the while as well, we're trying to make sure that they're steering clear of blaming behaviors, because it's quite easy at this point to go and do a cursory look at a process or a problem in an organization and assign that blame to people within that group or those functional areas that maybe have a responsibility for this process that are trying to be improved. So we want to resist that urge. And also with this question, what we're trying to do is to help them avoid jumping to the countermeasure phase early on in the process before we understand root cause, which again is the number one mistake that people make, not only in problem solving, but in life in general as it relates to dealing with problems. So on track, off track, process check. So you're off track when you hear things being said like, I already know what the root cause is. I've done this job a million years. I know exactly what's happening. I don't need to go see it for myself. Those things are pretty indicative of that. They're jumping to a conclusion. They're not approaching the process with an open mind. Whereas if they're saying things like, when we went to Gemba, here is what we found, what we learned, it was pretty interesting, we had no idea. So I'm listening to that kind of language as it relates to the current state of the process, because it really tells me that people are entering this process with the right intent, with the spirit of discovery, and not one to just confirm what they already think they know. Question number 5 is about breaking down the problem, more specifically, breaking down the impact of the problem by its gap. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. One of the traditional methods is to take the standard that you're trying to achieve minus the actual performance that you currently demonstrate, which gives you your gap. That gap is then visually expressed in some format that can label the reasons for why your problem exists. And that could be a Pareto chart by product, by region, division, or if we were looking at a defect Pareto, the types of defects or where those defects occur in the process. So their ability to demonstrate that helps us to understand that they have done that work in the previous question, and that they're able to really figure out what the critical few items that will need to be countermeasured are in order to close that gap, which helps keep them focused on the right priorities. If the answer to this question is something along the lines of, reams and reams of data and lots of different analyses and tools being used, almost like I call it admiring the problem, or you may be more familiar with analysis paralysis, where it appears on the outside we're making progress, but it's really activity that's not coming to a purposeful conclusion that results in the critical few causes comprising the gap being identified and prioritized, with at least 80% of that gap that you're trying to close in the problem statement being understood. That's how you know that people are on track, when they can clearly demonstrate that with a visual picture of where the gaps reside. Question number 6, we know what our gaps are now, and now we need to confirm that the root causes we believe are occurring are actually occurring. So it's confirmational evidence. So the question here to tease that out is, how can you test and confirm each of these likely causes before you proceed to the next step, which is developing those countermeasures or those actions? And what we're trying to coach, or the behavior that we're trying to coach here, is to teach the problem solver and the problem solving teams to let the facts lead to the root cause, not leading the witness in problem solving, to make sure they really know. And we have a term that we refer to as, what is the Gemba evidence? So if you were to go to court and on trial would be the problem, how could you demonstrate to the court of law the evidence required to convict that problem, rather than your assumptions, your opinions, your conjecture, the years of experience that you're relying upon to come to some conclusion? It's fact-based evidence that we would all look at the same way, align on, and build consensus for. So when the answer to that question is off track, you may hear a response such as, we all voted on the causes, we brainstormed them, we did the post-it note exercise with the fishbone diagram, and we feel very confident that we've determined what the root causes are. Versus an on-track response, which could be something along the lines of, we conducted a test, that test verified the causal impact, and we're able to repeat that outcome consistently through multiple tests and experiments that we're able to repeat. Tells you that they're utilizing a scientific approach to solving the problem. Question number 7, moving into countermeasures. So this question is about the effectiveness of developing countermeasures, and it goes like this. What options did you consider, both short-term and long-term, and think short-term as the Band-Aid, long-term as the systemic fix, to eliminate, reduce, and/or prevent the root causes from occurring? And what you're really trying to accomplish with this question is to figure out whether or not the team evaluated the relative merits of each individual countermeasure before they implemented it into the process. Did they figure out how effective it was, how feasible the idea is? Did they just jump on the first idea that came to them without testing a set of alternatives? Because what we find here as well, that there's a similar failure mode that people will jump to the first thing that they think works, very similar to how they'll jump to a solution or conclusion earlier on in the process that we covered. And the other thing you're trying to figure out here is, have they gone through the work of looking forward in the future, almost like a mini risk assessment, to look at when this change is implemented in the process, will it in fact introduce new problems in the work environment that maybe don't exist today? So they thought that far ahead. Experiments, voice of customer, tri-storming, these are all some tools that can help avoid those imminent risk or failures from happening before you do wide-scale adoption of the change across wherever the improvements would be applicable. The process check here, you may hear some off-track behaviors that sound like an answer to your question that sounds like this. There is only one way to solve this problem. I know what it is, I know what the answer is, and here's what we're going to do. And they may seem defensive when you ask them to explore what alternatives did they consider, almost as if you're the one who doesn't know what you're talking about, like there isn't another way to solve this problem. Versus, great question, we considered multiple alternatives, we tested options A, B, C, and so on, and before selecting the ones that we chose, we did this, and based on the impact of what those countermeasures offered to closure the gap, we chose these set of countermeasures to go forward. Or another answer could be, we're running a couple experiments in parallel because we don't know what one countermeasure will do in terms of its effectiveness over another. Therefore, the team decided to run both in parallel to gauge the impact of both and accelerate the learning that comes out of that as well. And that really demonstrates a democratic approach to choosing the countermeasures options. Question number 8 is around execution. So after we've identified what the countermeasures are that will need to take place, now we're talking about full-scale implementation and executing into the process. So the question here around execution is rather simple. It's who will do what by when. So I refer to that AKA as W to the third power. And you probably experience this in your organization where you're sitting down and you're having a discussion and many things are talked about, many topics, many issues, and many interesting ideas are thrown out. And it seems like problem solving is happening, but the conversation doesn't come to a conclusion or a resolution where you can wrap it up and decide who's going to do what by when. So if there isn't clarity around that, the execution will fall flat. So you want to really figure out, does this individual or this team understand what's required from an execution standpoint to hit the target condition, i.e. the standard? And do they have responsibilities clearly outlined? Do those people know what their roles are in executing that change? And when will it be done? Not Q3, not to be determined, but an actual day, a month, and a year, in this calendar year preferably, that these countermeasures will be implemented. The off-track behavior might look something like this. The countermeasures will be implemented by operations, this faceless, nameless group, in Q3. So the responsibility is nebulous, the date is nebulous, so it's really hard to pin down what's going to happen in terms of execution. And it seems like such a simple idea that anybody should understand, but it's happens more times than I care to talk about. You see this behavior quite often in problem solving. Whereas the on-track behavior would be very specifics around who's doing what. John's doing this action, number 1, against these root causes. The impact of that is X. It'll be done on this date. And oh, by the way, we're not going to rely on John to confirm that that happened. We're going to have status updates and go out and confirm that the progress has been made and that the impact is real so that we can stay on track. Question number 9. After the countermeasures have been executed, the temptation is to believe or trick yourself into believing that your problem-solving efforts are over. It's like you lost the weight, you've achieved the goal, and now you don't have to monitor the process from that point forward. So we call that the check step in PDCA. So how will you verify the effects of those countermeasures to ensure that those changes have been adopted inside of the process as normal day-to-day behavior? So that's what you're trying to figure out with this question is you're anticipating what data will need to be collected, how frequently they'll do it, what sort of mechanism will they use to track the progress. You know, they may use something like daily management or an hour-by-hour scorecard to monitor the performance, or perhaps a KPI bowler template. Most importantly, what you're trying to understand through this question is, do they even have a process to monitor the effectiveness? Now, if the answer is something like, well, once we implement the countermeasures, our work is done. What else do you want me to do? We did the action. It's them saying they believe inside of their head that there's no more left to do. There's no responsibility to be had to monitor. And I find very rarely that that's the case in problem solving, where you can walk away from something that requires minimal to zero follow-up post execution of a countermeasure. So on-track behavior could be, we're going to use the process of tiered daily management to monitor these critical KPIs and then capture those ongoing Pareto reasons to ensure that these root causes that we believe, or at least our team believes we've impacted, do not return. So it's like tracking and making sure those bars on the Pareto don't pop back up. If not, we know our countermeasures worked and that we've truly addressed the root cause of those problems. The last question is around sustainment. So in addition to the monitoring of the problem, we're really trying to figure out if the processes have found their way into the daily work. And the question is, what processes will you use to sustain the countermeasures? And there isn't one right answer here. I find that oftentimes it is a collection of sustainment processes that have to be bundled together in order to ensure that this change is real and that it's ongoing. Tools such as updating and training the standard work and documenting and posting the standard work. Of course, reviewing that standard work periodically, ensuring that it's being followed, updating the daily management metrics to incorporate maybe new metrics that need to be tracked on an ongoing basis, or critical visual controls inside of the process that are used to inform early on whether we have additional challenges or deviations from a standard. And then of course, tools like checklist, leadership, standard work, and audits, and then ultimately Gemba walks to again reinforce that this work has truly changed and that the process has been improved for good. So off-track behavior might sound like this. As long as we keep score on an ongoing basis, we feel pretty confident about our chances to sustain. So it's a lot of opinions. It's a lot of I think, I feel. There isn't clarity around exactly what we're going to do versus we've designed a combination of process improvements and sustainability methods, such as, and here's where you'd fill in the blank, and some examples of things that we've already given you here: standard work documentation, daily management, leadership standard work, all of this being incorporated into how we do the daily work to ensure that, again, the root causes don't come back. So these are the 10 questions. Again, as I said, it was very challenging to distill it down from hundreds of possibilities, reflecting the entirety of the PDCA process to figure out the 10 critical few items that you can use to coach people to become better problem solvers. Shifting gears to building the problem solving culture. So now we're going to talk about the process we use and some of the case studies that go along with that. So when we talk about building a problem-solving culture, let's set the framework for what that means. So there's a component of that that's organizational-wide training, which is workshops, it's train the trainer types of activities. There's a current state diagnostic around how your problem-solving culture performs today. There's an action plan that gets put into place to improve the skills around your organization around problem solving. And then the important work is around building that internal skill set. So this is where a lot of the coaching happens. So building the internal problem solving capability. And that's not a theoretical activity. We're working on real problems, real A3s, real coaching and problem solving relationships where we're meeting routinely and going through not only the questions that we talked about, but many other questions to ensure that people are on track. And through that circular process, we're driving real business impact through coaching and skill development. So that's what we're talking about when we say building a culture. So the subsequent slides coming after this, we'll talk about how we reinforce these 5 pillars. So the 2 companies that are some samples of where we've done this. One is Regal Rexnord, which is a industrial conglomerate, publicly traded, about $4 billion in revenue, around 30,000 employees. And you can see their footprint here geographically. And we partnered with them to identify 25 key leaders across these 3 geographic regions that would become train the trainers. So our job is to take what we know in our heads about solving problems and impart that discipline and that rigor and that structure and routine into these trainers who then be the trainers for the organization and rolling out these skills across the enterprise. Very similar in how we did it into a smaller business, just to give you the contrast between sizes of companies here. So Liquibox, it's private equity owned, it's in the packaging world. In fact, I'm here this week in Slovakia doing a train the trainer for problem solving with around 11 European trainer candidates who are going through a 12-month process. And they've identified 24 people that will be used to support these regions. And what's interesting about Liquibox, which is different than Regal Rexnord, is they're taking more of a holistic approach to ensure that the various functions inside of the business have representation as it relates to problem solving skills, because all of the functions inside of their company have metrics and KPIs and performance improvement expectations that they're responsible for, that problem solving skills are required in order to achieve. So we've married up 4 lean focused trainers with these 24 trainees, and we are acting as the coaches in defined periods and cadence of a rhythm of routine that we meet with them regularly around the adoption and implementation of an A3 topic. In fact, they've gone through 2 cycles, so they've owned 2 problems during this 12-month period that we've been partnering with them. And all of these problems were pre-vetted by top leadership in the company, CEO, level 1 leadership. So none of the topics being worked by these trainers are anything that the leadership team hasn't signed off on. So when we talk about the overview, it's one-on-one coaching with us, by us, key leadership inside of the organization that are really the ones that have followership inside your company. So these are the people that you look up to, that you're confident in, that can really change the culture. So with our help, the purpose of why we do that is to engage in this coaching kata, or standard work, if you will, this routine, to help the trainer enable that culture change around problem solving in the business. We usually meet with them twice a month, and this is after they've gone through the formal 2-day training a couple times. They've gone through a 3-day train the trainer, and they've now owned 2 A3 topics, and we've coached them through that bi-weekly in 1-hour sessions, and we're asking questions very similar to the ones we talked about. It's all done remote. Much of it's done in local language because we have team members that can speak multiple languages. And usually when we take this on, it's about 10 people going through a wave at one time. So in the case of both those clients, they had about 2 to 3 waves of trainers going through in a cohort, surrounded by and supported by 2 to 3 of our team. So it starts with a contract, and each and every person who's nominated has this agreement that is signed by them, it's signed by the CEO or president of the company, their one-over-one manager, and whomever the head of the continuous improvement function is inside of the organization. And if you don't have that, then it might be the most senior operations person or commercial person. So this is flexible. And what we're trying to avoid here are surprises in terms of who we select, why we select them, and the relevance that they have in the organization in terms of driving the impact required to realize this culture. Then the curriculum that they go through after being nominated and selected is they attend a 2-day course. They bring a real problem that's been pre-selected, pre-vetted, and after the 2-day course, they're continuing that problem-solving work through PDCA with our coaching guidance over about a period of 90 days, typically, is about how long some of these problems take based on the size and scope. After closing the gap on that problem, they come back a second time, but this time looking at the 2-day course through the eyes of how do I need to facilitate this instruction. So they're taking facilitation notes, they're understanding their exercises, the stories, the notes being taken on the slides. And then they do a 3-day teach back in that same week. And this where we are this week with this client, where they're teaching back the material to me with my coaching and my guidance to ensure that they understand how to deliver this content effectively inside of their organization. Then once they pass that, we co-facilitate a 2-day workshop with them, observing them teach the entirety of the curriculum. They again receive feedback, and then their focus shifts from problem-solving owner to problem-solving coach. Now we're watching them coach others in the organization through the completion of A3 topics, again with our guidance. So it's a train the trainer approach to ensure that they can demonstrate the skill sets around problem solving. There's a required reading list, and they read about a book a month over this 12-month period, and you can see the 12 book topics that are outlined, and it's a large cross-section of different topics that are intended to create a well-rounded thinker as we think about problem-solving skill sets and tools that they may have to use when engaging in teaching problem solving and coaching problem solving in an organization. And the tools and the topics inside of these books aren't all technical in nature. There's some soft side skills of things that they need to understand, such as crucial conversations as an example, or creating a lean culture. There's many cultural aspects of that book. And they answer questions, we discuss their takeaways from that. And again, it just augments and supports the learning throughout the journey. For those that are nominated, there's a first correspondence that goes out informing them of the journey that they're about to take. So all the pre-work, the trainers that they're going to be married up with, the process that they're going to go through, the expectations, the tracking mechanisms that we're going to employ to monitor their success throughout the program. All of it is clearly articulated throughout the journey. And then we use standard work such as this to track a letter grade and also progress towards achieving the milestones throughout the entire process. So each time we have a touch point call with them every 2 weeks, we have an updated dynamic score A through F, and only A's and B's make it through to the end of the program. So I would say, looking back on similar engagements, this about 15% of the time, there's 15% of the trainers don't make it through the entirety of the program. They fail to meet some of the requirements along the way. During our feedback sessions, it's very formalized. So there's a set of questions and topics that we engage upon and throughout PDCA. There's a checklist that the A3 owner uses, the person receiving the coaching, and there's a checklist that we use as the coach to guide the conversation. And there's total transparency around what we're using for each other. So they know what we're going to ask, and we know what they're expected to do. So there's zero surprises throughout the process. Mentioned the 2-day workshop. So the content that we cover in the 2-day workshop is covered over 2 full 8-hour days. The nominees and their colleagues who aren't going through a certification program similar to themselves bring real problems to the workshop, working in teams. So it's typical that there be 30 people in a setting like this, maybe 5 to 6 work teams working on shared problems that are really impactful to the business and predetermined and pre-agreed upon by leadership inside the company. So nothing about what we teach here is theoretical. And then I mentioned the 5-day train the trainer that they go through. So they come back a second time, participate in the 2-day course again, this time through the lens of teaching the process. And in addition to the 2 days, there's 3 additional days that week where they're going deeper into the material, understanding the background and content behind every tool and framework and an idea inside of the training material. But then also, more importantly, we get to watch them for the first time teach it back to us and to their peers, and we give them real-time coaching and feedback. So that's the process. There's some case studies. So some next steps for you to consider if you're really interested in how do you get started in building this high performance problem solving culture inside your organization. You can start with a self-assessment, and this is one of the handouts that we've made available for you. And it's not overly burdensome, and it's not meant to be a precise tool that you could use with a complete diagnostic kind of end to end. And the way I would advise using this is print it out, get your leadership team together or whatever group that you're trying to affect change in terms of problem solving skill sets in, and just go through this together. And maybe the way you do it is you score it individually, and then you come together as a group and you harmonize the scores and you discuss where you had big differences and variation around what you scored in terms of your effectiveness as it relates to a firefighting culture or problem solving culture. So it's on a 1 to 10 scale, and you simply just place the X where you believe you more naturally lean towards. So if you're in the 1 side, that means you truly believe the answer to that question is you look more like that firefighting organization. Your X's would be on the left side, versus on the right side would be you believe that you do have an effective problem solving culture. And again, this may be different at different levels of the organization, different departments within your business. It looks different for the company. It looks different down at the lowest level. So figure out what the scope is, and it's going to be a great starting point to take stock of where you are and gain alignment and consensus around where you are. My guess is that none of this will be too surprising to most people, but it's the first time they've had to put it into words and decide where they fit. So that's a step that you can take. If you're interested in the problem solving workshop, we offer that. We can do the 2-day training, or some clients extend it to fit more of a Kaizen roadmap where there's a continuation of the A3 in that week, and we actually close the gap on many of those root causes that are identified during the workshop. So we'll make sure that you scope those problems that they can fit in that amount of time. But people are going through a full cycle of PDCA, telling their story using the A3 template, and then through the participation in this workshop have a really good introduction and grasp and knowledge of how to go about solving problems in the business. So if you're interested in more, as I mentioned in the beginning, we do a monthly series on these webinars. So every month we have topics. I believe in September we have 4 planned webinars. So you can go to this site here. It's our leanfocus.com website, and there's a tab on the top that says Thought Leadership. You click on that tab, it will take you to the planned webinars that we have upcoming, but also the webinars that we've run in the past. So you can watch these on demand, and you just sign up and you can watch them at your own leisure. So I leave you with this closing thought from Nobel Prize winner Albert Schweitzer. The 3 most important ways to lead people are by example, by example, by example. I think you get the point. And problem solving is no different.